I'm Nola Simon, and I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. Thank you for joining me this morning. So, you may have noticed an article that I had published in Maclean's magazine. I didn't write it. It was a journalist named Rosemary Counter, and it does look like it's got my byline on it, but I didn't write it. I just told my story. So, that's where if you actually look on Maclean's right now and you search for Nola Simon, Maclean's magazine, go to first person, and it'll actually show there. It's about midlife career switching, right? And I was asked to tell my story. So they've also asked me to do a tech talk. So I've been practicing short form video, which is the current trend. I'm really hoping that it's not a long term trend because video is not my favorite format. I much prefer writing, I much prefer audio. And so I do like to put myself out of my comfort zone and test it out. I do find it really challenging to keep it short. So yesterday I was trying to do a LinkedIn video because LinkedIn video has to be 90 seconds or less for the new video tab. And I could only get it to 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And that's as short as it got. But I also felt that it deserved a broader topic. And that's why I want to do a podcast about it. So the topic that I recorded in video yesterday was basically about midlife career switching or pivots, whatever you want to call it. In the article, you read a lot about the context of my personal career, but it doesn't really, might help you understand and role model some of the things that I did, but it doesn't necessarily provide you with specific actions and advice. So that's where I thought there was an opportunity to maybe do a podcast about it. And for the record, I'm not a career coach. I'm really just sharing my approach that's worked for me and for people who I'm close to. At one point while I was working, I all of a sudden noticed that all of my friends had actually been promoted because they were listening to my advice. And that made me realize that I should really pay attention to the advice that I give and take it myself. So this is the genesis of that, basically. So the first thing I wanted to mention was you need to actually start much sooner than you think you're going to need to if you want to do midlife career pivot. Midlife changes often aren't voluntary. So, for example, like my father was laid off. He worked for TD Bank for probably 15, 16 years, something like that. And his mid 50s, he was laid off. And he never really got another good job. He became a security guard. And actually, he liked that job. He was much happier. But he never got the type of corporate job that he had enjoyed, although he was providing security services in a bank, so it's adjacent. For me, the opportunity wasn't so much that it was a layoff. They came to me with an alternate position, but essentially it was constructive dismissal. They were changing everything about my job, and I wasn't okay with that. And so I hired a lawyer. The role was restructured, so it disappeared out from under me, and they did offer me something else, but it wasn't in line with anything that I planned, and that's how I ended up here. But realistically, I started looking for career switching back in 2014. I had made a change to get remote work access back in 2011, and I really only wanted to give that company another 2, 3 years. So by 2014, I was ready to move again. And then life happens. That's what happens in midlife. You have responsibilities, you have people depend on you, families to support, children, relatives who get sick. In my case, my father-in-law died suddenly in Florida, and my mother developed dementia and passed away in 2017. So the company honestly got another 5 years out of me that I wasn't ever planning to give them because I wanted to change jobs. So you need to start much earlier than you expect to. And hopefully in your case, it's not 5 years like it was in my case, but it's useful to prep the groundwork. And a lot of it is really reflecting and assessing your skills, understanding what you've already done, where you want to go, what the trends are in the marketplace, but really doing a lot of self-trust and understanding what fuels you, what drains you, and moving towards that and taking micro steps. Yes, career switching involves a lot of reflection, but it also involves practices that fuel you and get you into the mindset to really understand yourself. So in my case, yoga, walking, writing, meditation, mindfulness, all of that really those are the supporting practices that I have in my life to really help me tune into what it is that I want. But you have to be really careful not to pay too much attention to what other people want. One of the things about career changes midlife is everybody's got an opinion and everybody's invested in who you've been in your life up until that point. So you may actually find that you get pushback from the people who are closest to you, and they're not necessarily the best people to build your confidence, help you figure out where your strengths are, where your gaps are. In my particular case, I hired career coaches, and I hired two different career coaches at different times. One was Sarah Vermont. Both of them being guests on my podcast, so you can go back and listen to their episodes. I'll tag them. So Sarah, I hired actually just after my father-in-law died, and it took me a while to get through her program, but she was instrumental in getting me out of the U.S. division of the company that I was working for into another job there because I wanted stability, right? My husband's self-employed as well. So I needed that stability. I was always the person who got easily approved for different things. I was the person who had worked for the company for over 10 years. So people look at me and they check boxes and go, oh, you're stable. And we also had kids. So we needed to make sure that we had a reliable base for them as well, too. And that's not just financial, but it's also time-based. How do your structures work? How do they know who to trust to show up to pick them up? All those things that go along with having kids. And then my mother developed dementia and died in 2017. And all of that took a lot more away from my mental state, honestly. And I needed that extra support that wasn't necessarily family. So that's where I hired career coaches to help me with my mindset, right? And my other coach is Carrie Twigg. And Carrie is interesting because initially I started following her because of career coaching and resume advice. But then she combines her work with theater and also then started developing mindfulness and meditation. And when the pandemic hit, I started really paying attention to what she was talking about with mindfulness and meditation, and I've really embraced that and developed my own practice, still working with her. And then now she's pivoting that more into leadership development as well, too. And so it's actually cool to see what you can actually pick up as your coaches themselves. Because with Sarah she was the first person I ever saw put out there, tell me your favorite podcast. I want to be a guest on podcasts. And then she did all of this media where she was on popular podcasts. And then she got into television media. So she's often appears on Cityline. She has a lot of connections. Initially, she did go to school for journalism. So she actually has a well-developed network of journalists. And that's actually how Maclean's article happened. Sarah came to me and said, I know this journalist who's looking to do this article. It's really interesting to see how your coaches themselves develop their own practices in their own lives and see how you can benefit from their own changes as well. Because I'm very much the type of person who I learn by doing, but I also like to see that you take your own advice and apply it to your own work and see how it actually plays out as a live role model. And that was really interesting for me as well, too. Yeah, definitely you have to reflect. You have to figure out the practices that you got in place. I'm not a journaler, for example. I don't really like doing journaling, but I do writing. But when I first was restructured, I stayed away from writing publicly because I needed to understand how I was feeling. Because there's a lot of grief that goes into it. So in my particular case, it was amplified with what was happening with my family, particularly my mother. But there's grief in the identity shift. And for me, some of that old identity was really hard to let go of. So I've taken a lot of courses. I worked in financial services for years. So I have a certified financial planner certificate. I have certifications related to financial services at the Yin Yang. And none of that really matters because I'm not necessarily targeting another job within financial services if it happens, because everybody can benefit from hybrid remote and futurism. But it's not necessarily my target because for me, it's a crutch. It's what I've worked in so long. It's easy, right? But letting go of that knowledge and that for me, I realized that I was never really attached to a particular title because a lot of times people didn't understand what I did because I worked with American customers and like 401ks are not really relevant in Canada. So I was never really invested in the particular title that I had, but I was interested in the name recognition of working with an established large company brand. And so I introduced myself a lot of times as the employee of this company. And that was actually hard to let go. And that hurt a lot too, because they were the same company who restructured me and made my job disappear and didn't really value the skills that I brought. And so that was hurtful. And there's a lot of emotions that I had to process in terms of that. There's a lot of grief in terms of a lot of the ways that they decided to behave once I hired the lawyer. And so it's an emotional process as well, which people talk about emotions in terms of what it's like to lose your job and be restructured, but they don't necessarily talk about the grief that's involved in that identity shift. And you have to deal with other people not wanting to let that go either. So, like the people who are closest to you, your friends, your family, the people who have known you for a really long time, they get invested in the identity, the professional identity that you present to the world. And they're like, why can't you just do that? Why can't you just do that at a different company? Why can't you just do more of the same? And it's almost like a comfort thing, and they want instant type of reactions. And so they can be supportive, but they may not really truly understand what's going on in terms of your career shifting and pivots. And they have their own emotions to deal with it there as well, too. So the grief is something that you really have to allow time for, which again goes back to this is going to take you longer than you think it might. And it's about being prepared and figuring out how you want to actually present yourself, which gets into this whole liminal state. So you weren't what you were, and you're not yet what you want to be. So you have to figure out what you're taking with you. So what skills and abilities translate into the new type of work that you want to do, whether that's working for another company or in my case, it was starting a business. But you also have to figure out what you have to drop, what you have to let go. Letting go is really hard. And then you have to figure out how to actually translate that into the new thing. And that is where you can reflect as much as you want. But for the new thing to actually start to take place and take shape, you actually have to start to take action. So you have to get it out of your head. You have to breathe life into it. If we're going back to some of the things that Carrie has taught, and I'm sure I don't quite get the terminology, but it's you have to breathe life into the character. I think it's Chekhov, where you actually stand the character up. So even if you've written a play and you've talked it through, you actually have to get up on stage and act. And this is actually the same sort of thing with career switching. You actually have to do concrete things that inform your next actions. So, for example, like I found that writing was very helpful, but I also needed to verbalize. I needed to vocalize, and that's why I started a podcast because podcasting allowed me to talk about the thing, and it also allowed me to talk about different aspects of it with experts, and it allowed me to build out a personal brand. So in combination with the writing that I was doing on LinkedIn and all the other work that I do in social media, I started also getting media interviews. And that again builds out that personal brand and expertise and starts to develop leads and interactions with people who could possibly hire you. Those are all actions. Action could be like designing your website. You have to be careful because marketing doesn't necessarily pay anything. So all these things and actions I'm talking about are marketing actions. So you have to sequence your actions to make sure that they're actually leading to something that's actually going to get you paid. For example, I actually got a speaking gig off TikTok, which is why I'm interested in actually seeing what happens with the Macleans TikTok that they've asked me to do, because I do know that's a platform, even though I didn't have a great presence there, it's very concretely leads to actual business. You have to sequence your actions to make sure that they're getting to getting you where you want to be to actually take the next step into developing your future identity. And a lot of this could be networking, it could be speaking, it could be interviewing, it could be gathering data for a book, it could be researching, lots of different actions you could take. It's going to look different for every role, every person, every industry. It's all different depending on what it is you want to do and who you're trying to influence. And the other thing you have to really pay attention to is the personal branding. So it used to be enough to develop a website and have a portfolio or a resume, but it's not necessarily like that anymore because AI is a thing. So I did actually a personal branding podcast with Cher Jones. And one of the interesting things I did just before I interviewed her was like, tell me about Cher Jones. I just put in ChatGPT and I got a whole summary of who she was as a person because she has a very significant public presence. She's been doing the work that she does for a very long time. I did it for me and I had no public presence because I'd been working for a private company. Well, the public, but not in the public eye. Cher was in media. So it wasn't really until I got ChatGPT 4 that has upgraded training and like Perplexity that really is trained off information that I've made public since those companies started collecting data, that I start to have a very comprehensive personal brand that's public in AI. So it's not just what Google knows about you. You don't just Google your name. You also see what AI knows about you as well, too. And it's who the network, but also where they can gain information about you. So it's not just your website. It's not just your podcast. It's not just your social media, but you have to consider how that looks for AI. So that's another aspect of it as well, too. So it's going to take longer. You're going to have to go through a certain amount of grief to let go what was and to move into what is. And you're going to have to take experiments, take actions, and just pivot and try to optimize for more of the skills and work that fulfills you and sustains you and makes you excited and less of the work that drains you. For example, if I could get away from any type of transactional work, I will. It's the type of stuff that drives me bananas. I don't like spreadsheets where I have to just double check things and check things off. And it's mind numbing and I hate it with a passion. And if I never have to do that type of work again, I would prefer not to. I'm much better at things that are ambiguous and big picture thinking and strategy and strategic thinking, things that are innovative and nobody else has done. Those are the types of things that make me perk up. And that's where I'm drawing to the hybrid remote futurism, because honestly, it's not really just focused on that niche. It's the future of work and what that's going to look like and how that's going to change and all of the aspects that go into that. And that's leadership, that's management, that's processes and procedures, but it's also design and bigger concepts like trust and respect and psychological safety. All of that is all in play. So it's a very large topic, even though it might start with the focus at the niche level of hybrid remote. And that's exciting to me, right? Because there are no clear answers. No one person in the world knows the exact answer of what that's going to look like. It's a choose your own adventure type of job. And you're picking up signals and trends and paying attention to hope and optimism and also the negativity. It's hybrid remote and return to office. That's one of the most polarizing topics out there. But it's because of all of the different aspects that are in play. And that's fascinating to me. It's really exciting to me. So that's a summary of my best tips. Again, I'm not a career coach. You definitely want to hire one that you feel is best for you, that fits with your personality and your interest and knows how to guide you and distract you from things that aren't actually useful. For example, Carrie's actually very good at telling me that I'm wasting my time. I got involved in Canva and created like 20 different templates. And she's, yeah, that's great work, but does it actually make you money? See, you need somebody who can actually call you out on your shit, or at least I do. So that's helpful. And I could probably go on a little bit about how coaching can be quite fun, but we'll stop it there. So I am actually going to try a new thing where you can actually give me feedback or ask me questions. It's a feature of Podgagement, which is a company that I actually like because I can actually put a one page out and you can get access to all of the players that actually will play the podcast. And it also does reviews as well too. But they also have a new feature where you can actually submit questions. You record that either in written format or actually leave like a voicemail type thing. That would be cool, especially if you're willing to have that question or a comment or insight actually played, and I could include it in the podcast. And that's fun from an engagement point of view. I know other podcasts do that. Fixable, for example, is a podcast by Tad Francis Fry and Ann Morris. They actually collect questions from people, and then they actually invite those people on to actually be interviewed. And I'm not quite there yet. I want to experiment with it a little bit, but I do know that's an example of how people are using that type of voicemail question to answer topics and talk about topics that are very interesting to people in that particular moment. So that's how you stay on top of things is you get your audience to really get involved in the content that you're actually creating. And that's something that's always interested me. I've just never figured out an easy way to do that, but Podgagement allows me to do that. So I'll put the affiliate link in the show notes. Again, I'm just experimenting with affiliate marketing. I'm not ever going to recommend a product I don't use or that I don't believe in. So yes, I might get paid a small amount, but I would, and I have promoted Podgagement without affiliate marketing attached to it at all. Something to consider. And again, we'll just wrap that up for today. Thank you very much for listening and hope it was useful to you. Thanks.